so far. Has there been much of one? Are you clear on what the policies of both candidates are when it comes to the economy?
Well, I think that basically both of them want to promote investment in new industries and so forth. Donald Trump is more willing to let the market allocate capital, whereas Harris would prefer to have industrial policy where the government, directs investment and more in the direction to its suiting. That's the principal difference. You can make a case on both sides. My feeling is Mr. Trump has been more reckless in the proposals he's offered. I mean, they're both going to increase the deficit. I mean, they both are proposing initiatives that are going to cost far more than the taxes or revenue sources that they claim will cover them. And Trump has been less responsible than Harris in that regard. But I frankly discount all that because I believe that in reality the Congress is going to pass all these people want, and the deficit's going to go up, but about the same for either one.
Well, have a listen to this, Bjorn. We're going to be really interested to get your thoughts on this, because on that very issue, and you report from the non-profit committee for responsible federal budget, kind of both, as Peter said, candidates will deepen the national tax pay for their initiatives. I've been speaking to the president of that committee, Wiggins.
The unfortunate outcome is that what we found is that both campaigns are filled with promises that overall would absolutely fail to fix the huge fiscal problems that we have, would in all likelihood increase the level of borrowing with quite a range from not increasing it at all for Harris at the low end to up to $8 trillion over 10 years. And what we found is that former President Trump's effect would probably be roughly twice that size, from a range of about $1.5 trillion to a whopping $15 trillion over 10 years.
Is that because of tax?
Well, both campaigns have lots of tax cuts and lots of spending increases and fewer offsets to overall offset those costs of those. But in both cases, the Harris campaign has tax cuts that aren't quite as large and does more to offset those. They've also made a commitment that they wouldn't add to the debt. We don't find that their policies quite lay out the details of how to achieve that yet, but starting with that promise is a good point. The Trump campaign has talked less about meeting any fiscal metric, and they have much larger tax cuts, and in many cases, much higher spending as well on the areas of defense and changes to immigration. I think the bottom line is we can't afford to be adding anything to the debt, and both of these plans would be on track to add trillions. So there's a real problem no matter where you look.
Well, that doesn't sound very good moving forward for the U.S. economy. I mean, it is such a huge problem, the U.S. debt, and we keep getting these situations when we're on the verge of a shutdown. I suppose they keep making these promises because they think it gets them votes.
Both those points about the shutdown and the huge debt are exactly right. So we have huge levels of polarization. The way that both political parties think they win over voters is to promise them tax cuts and spending increases. And so that's why we get political promises, they're rewarded, and we have kind of a competition to see who can give away more things. You pass budgets very often right now. There is no short-term action forcing moment to require it. And so we keep making things worse.
I wonder if, the politicians clearly have to take some responsibility here. But so do the voters as well, because they are given things that they want, but they can't really afford. Isn't it time that they maybe have a different voice?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's kind of a circular reinforcing problem. So you have politicians who promise all these goodies and giveaways, and I think the voters start to think, well, I guess if everybody says we can have them, we can, and they deep down know it's not true, but who doesn't want to take the dessert instead of the spinach if that's what you're offered? And what we've seen in the past is the only way this issue becomes a central issue on the political agenda is from the top. It has to be leadership, but we haven't had this bad a fiscal situation and this level of polarization at any point before, and so it's hard to see how we get out of this mess.
How do you get out of this mess? I presume, Peter, you're a spinach, not a dessert man.
Well, yes, I am. I mean, my feeling is that we have to start making hard choices about defense, about social spending, about taxes, and so forth. Americans don't pay enough taxes. They're middle class, they're billionaires. Americans want too many benefits from government that they think they don't have to pay for, and something has to be done about that. So, I think it's time for Americans to eat their spinach, but you go on TV and you say that, they'll bite it back again.
That's true. Monica, right, so we are going to hear a lot from you over the course of this campaign. You have started by looking at
we had heard the Friday really surprised some economists. They called those numbers blowout numbers, and people are really looking closely at them. Certainly just a few weeks ahead of the election. So it's interesting when you start digging into the data, because you see the Biden administration has, according to them, created many jobs, good jobs, union jobs. This is really the goal of what they are trying to do, especially coming out of the pandemic. But if you look and talk to some other people, like in the tech sector, when you look at the newspaper or you go online, you see Intel has laid off people across the tech sector, as well as media has been hit really hard, in addition to the finance sector. So, some people I've been speaking to are saying that maybe there's a white collar recession that is happening. But at the end of the day, data, these are people. And I was able to talk to some people in the tech field about how they have been impacted. So it was interesting to get their perspective, and they've been looking for work for quite some time.
September's unemployment data beat many analysts' expectations. The U.S. added 254,000 jobs in September, and the unemployment rate fell from 4.2% in August to 4.1% last month. But if you're one of the 6.8 million people out of work, like Andre Balish, the numbers bring little comfort.
I've been out of work for about 2 years.
The Brooklyn resident worked in e-commerce for roughly 20 years, doing product and program management. He's currently looking for an opportunity based on his experience.
And it's been a struggle all across the board. I think there's a lot of great candidates right now that are looking, and companies have been reluctant to hire, especially in the last 2 years.
Andre says there are days of frustration, but he's grateful he has a supportive family and has joined a community of job seekers called Never Search Alone.
It's great to have other people that you can talk through the process with, where you are, be able to reflect on things that you've done well, opportunities for you to improve, and just, again, get context as far as, what's going on.
People in the tech world are facing a serious economic downturn.
Phil Terry wrote a job search guidebook called Never Search Alone in 2022. That's the same year tens of thousands of tech workers were laid off after the pandemic. Having worked with Silicon Valley companies for roughly 25 years, he got the idea of running these support groups from the senior vice president of Peloton, who was looking for work. And the idea caught on. Today, his staff of volunteers are currently running 2,400 job search groups around the world.
If you're looking for a job, everyone's anxious and insecure. Even in a good job market. In a bad job market, that's triple, right?
Phil says there has been a dramatic decline in venture capital funding that backs startups and small businesses in the tech sector. But there could be some positive news on the horizon. The U.S. Federal Reserve cut the benchmark federal funds interest rates by 0.5 percentage point last month, a move which will ease the cost of borrowing.
The tech economy is very sensitive to interest rates. And tech is now so much a part of everything, right? So I hope that helps.
I sat down with acting U.S. Labor Secretary June Sue, who said they've seen job growth almost across the board in construction, clean energy, hospitality, and healthcare. But she also says it's not a linear process. It doesn't happen every single month the same way.
I don't know how to predict for a particular industry, but I do think that the more we invest to further economy overall, the more industries benefit. And so, the more time still in the community, we've seen this concept of we think that this would build up the community, so it's a good job. They need to do that. Now there's, the local economy that's needed for help.
Andre is also thankful his field could start hiring again. He has some tips for other job seekers.
How to structure, how to routine, have some things outside of the job search, because the job search will be frustrating, and so have some things that you can look forward to that will be frustrating. And look for things that help remind you that you have value.
We have some other things to go on that real quick. This one would be, Jennifer, comes here with those who are feeding and preparing the job all the way from China to what's the unemployment situation?
Well, it's been hovering between 5 and 6% since the pandemic, and it hasn't really shifted. It's a lot worse than double digits for the youth unemployment, and people who have job jobs are feeling quite insecure. They are worried that they are dispensable at this point because even though the workforce is shrinking, still there's a lot of people, as you mentioned. There are hundreds of millions of people in the workforce. So employers still have the upper hand at this point, and there are lots of employees who are feeling very vulnerable. I heard from a taxi driver who said that he had some customer the other night who didn't take his mom to the hospital because he was too worried to take time off from work because he's in his 40s, and that's a really critical stage. People who are 35 and above are seen as too old for many sectors in China.
Yeah, I have very similar stories whenever I go to India with similar populations, sort of similar potential labour force out there to take other people's jobs. Peter, this labour market in the US has been confusing so many people, hasn't it, when it comes to the economy? What do you make of where it is now?
Well, the labor market in terms of aggregate numbers is quite good. I mean, we're creating a lot of jobs. We're creating over 200,000 jobs a month against the population that can only really increase its position in the labor market by about 80,000. And the balance is coming from immigration, not all of which is legal. But within that context, there's a lot of structural change going on. For example, in the tech sector, people that were in high demand are no longer in demand. Whereas, people that know something about artificial intelligence, they can write their own ticket. So you've got that over and over again. In the legal profession, people who do M&A work, because of high interest rates, and they have come down, but not a lot, they are not finding work because M&A, a lot of mergers and acquisitions aren't going on. So, there's good and bad, and that's sort of the way capitalism works. People don't like that. And I sympathize with them, but also a lot of folks in the job market have expectations that are unrealistic. A lot of people in the tech sector are accustomed to, a free breakfast in the morning, working at home, showing up in sweats and whatever. And the world is more structured than that, and they have to accommodate themselves to that structure.
Well, listen, Monica, it's been fascinating hearing that report from you. What are some of the other issues you think we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks? Economy, of course, top of the agenda. I suppose, when you've come back, are a lot of people talking to you about inflation and prices and which of the candidates is going to tackle that better?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to hit the road before I talk to you next, and I'm going to look at gas prices or petrol prices, which is something that everyone who drives a car, which is better, look at every day. I mean, it's interesting. It's that one price when you drive on the highway that is about 10 feet tall, depending on where you are on the turnpike or the highway, and you say, oh yeah, it's gone up, it's gone down, it makes sense. There's even this meter that kind of ticks up and reminds you just how much money you're spending with each pump. So it's something that really has a huge impact on family incomes, on businesses. I'm going to talk to some people who will be impacted by that.
Well, we look forward to hearing from you next week as well. A wonderful start there. Sort of more in-depth look at a different issue every Monday. That's the employment issue there, and of course, oil prices creeping up at the moment, still way below where they were before. Obviously, that uncertainty in the Middle East having an impact. Will be interesting to see if it has much of an impact on the US election. Right, we're going to go to Japan now, where there have been lots of headlines like this.
Japan's government is facing criticism after admitting to editing an official cabinet photo to tidy up its members' appearances. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and Defense Minister Jen Nakatani have been
I like the thought of that because I'm often have a rather uncanny experience. My shirts not where they should be.
Well, we don't need to talk. We know that you're in Canada.
Yeah, well, thanks. But
So am I. So
Again,
we'll read it.
no, you are not, because I was looking at pictures of you before, as I was doing before the program, and there you were with your bow ties. I'm hoping that we can sort of do that to you. I mean, does it matter, Peter, the way you look?
Well, I think that you need to present yourself in a way that people expect, and that will give you recognition. And, the Japanese, whenever I meet a Japanese businessman, he's always got a gray suit on, and he's very tidy and so forth, and extraordinarily polite, which I do appreciate. And the Japanese culture expects that. I think you need to meet the expectations of your constituents, of your audience, and so forth. I mean, there was a time when we did radio in basically a movie in a movie theater, and there was an audience and so forth, and you were expected, if you were doing the sportscast, to show up in a tuxedo.
Yeah.
And I would be happy to do that if it was necessary.
Well, it is.
You
it is.
need
The
to
next time,
remember who
please
the customer is.
Yeah, well, we expect it from. But you're right, actually, joking aside, the World Service Doctor used to be used. But you know what? And in the original days, people would wear tuxedos. I mean, are you surprised at this, Jennifer? Because Japanese politicians will know the importance of appearance. The fact that your shirt's out, your belly's out a little bit, it's not really what you expect to see, is it?
No, but it's very common here in China. I remember when I was working for state media, they took me to do, it was a newsletter, by the way. It was an industry newsletter. I was there as an editor, a publisher, as they called it. And I remember they were not only looking at the eyebrows of the official, they filled it in, but also the size of the photo mattered depending on their ranking in the order of the Communist Party. So I was flabbergasted. I literally saw them pull out the ruler to check and make sure that photo, number 2, was not bigger than number 1 at the conference. So it definitely does happen. I don't know if leaders really care if the eyebrow is, missing a hair or 2, but somebody cares.
They do, and it has really quite reaction. Right, we're going to move on to our first story here. Would I have to say surprising that Taylor Swift and Rihanna become the world's richest female musician? That's according to Forbes magazine. Reports of around $1.6 billion. It only surprised me because I thought she already was the richest one. Jennifer, was this a surprise to you?
Not at all. I mean, she's been popular. Just the movie of her Eras tour was just showing.
No, but the fact that
she
Rihanna
was super popular.
Rihanna had more money than her. I was surprised.
She's the queen. I can tell you that.
I suppose it's because Rihanna has lots of other things, just as music, it's cosmetics and fashion and all that stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of young people globally, because of social media, they all want to, imitate their peers. So it definitely makes sense. She's very popular here in China too.
Peter, where are you? Rihanna.
So it's not surprising that she might have more money for a while. But we get a succession of rock stars that become extraordinarily wealthy, going back to, George M. Cohan and Eddie Cantor, Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley. So Taylor Swift now, and there'll be somebody after her. I wish her well. I don't know what one does with all that money, other than worry about losing it.
Well, I don't think she worries about losing. Probably thinking about how to get a bit more. The fact is, both of you, before you go, Jay-Z is the richest overall musician. He's estimated at more than $2.5 billion, which is quite a lot more than what Taylor Swift has at the moment. Something for her to think about. We'll be back same time, same place tomorrow.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and here's what's happening in the studio this week.
How does a hugely successful crime writer keep going? Sitting down and actually write books is hard, and it's not getting any easier. From one week to the next, I never know what keep going on. Join me, Andy Martin, with Ian Rankin, as he works to complete his next thriller.
In the studio, today at 12:30 and 21:30 GMT. At bbcworldservice.com, assignment.
In Singapore, using any illicit narcotic, including cannabis, is illegal. If you're caught, you may spend months in the state's prison-like drug rehabilitation centre. I'm Linda Presley. Join me for the first in a 2-part series. Singapore, Drugs, Rehab, Execution.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Hello. Israelis have marked the anniversary of the Hamas attacks on southern Israel last year. Here's Prime Minister Netanyahu. We have outlined the goals of this war and we are achieving them. Toppling the rule of Hamas, and we will not stop eliminating any future threat from Hamas to Israel. In this edition of the Newsroom, we'll hear from northern Israel, Lebanon, and our correspondent about the situation in Gaza. It's 1 hour GMT. Later in the programme, another huge hurricane is heading for Florida. Please, if you're in the Tampa Bay area, you need to evacuate. If they have called for your evacuation order, I beg you, I implore you to evacuate. Winds of 260 kilometres an hour are on their way. We'll also hear how Kamala Harris fared in her latest media test, a big interview with just 4 weeks to go until the US election. All that, and we hear about an X-rated in-flight entertainment error after this bulletin.
This is Danielle Yarowiecka with the BBC News. Hello. The Israeli Prime Minister has described his country's year-long military campaign as a sacred mission which will continue so long as its existence is threatened. Benjamin Netanyahu said the operations in Gaza, Lebanon and elsewhere in the region must not be stopped as he put it prematurely. He made the remarks in a televised address at the end of commemorations marking the first anniversary of the deadly attacks by Hamas on Israel. The BBC's Jeremy Bowen is in Tel Aviv.
Here in Hostage Square, they worry that a country fighting wars in Gaza, Lebanon, and in direct conflict with its citizens still held by Hamas. It's been so long that some of the families believe they've been abandoned by Prime Minister Netanyahu, whose government is dominated by hardliners who oppose deals with any of Israel's enemies. For the Prime Minister and his military advisors, one option is to follow President Biden's advice not to target Iran's most valuable assets, its petrochemical industry and most of all, its nuclear sites. The opposing view is that an all-out war is already happening.
Warnings of dangerous winds and storm surges have been issued along Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula as a powerful hurricane rapidly builds strength off the coast. Forecasters have upgraded Milton to an extremely dangerous Category 5 storm. The hurricane, with wind speeds of up to 260 kilometers an hour, is heading towards the US state of Florida. Before boarding a plane in Maryland, the Vice President Kamala Harris urged people in the Tampa area of Florida to heed any evacuation orders.
I know a lot of folks out there have survived these hurricanes before. This one is going to be very, very serious. And I urge you to please just grab whatever you need. Listen to the orders you're getting from your local officials. They know what they're telling you. They know what Milton is about to be.
A court in the United States has approved a bankruptcy plan for the cryptocurrency firm FTX, which will allow it to repay customers in full. The money will come from $16 billion in assets recovered since the company, which was one of the world's leading crypto exchanges, collapsed 2 years ago. Creditors will receive at least 118% of the value of their claims in cash. But one former customer, Lydia, told the BBC she wasn't happy with the settlement.
I feel that I lost the money because when I put my money, then the value stock went down. So with what they will give me back with the plan, confirmation that happened today, I will have 1/3 of the fiat money that I deposit. So it's not even having the proper value that the crypto has nowadays. That is the main frustrating thing.
You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC. 10 police officers have been injured in clashes with opposition protesters in Albania's capital, Tirana. Supporters of the opposition Democratic Party threw petrol bombs at the Prime Minister's office and nearby buildings. In response, police used tear gas to disperse the crowds. The demonstrators demanded that the current government be replaced by a technocratic cabinet ahead of a parliamentary election due next year. Ukraine says a Russian missile has hit a merchant ship in the port of Odessa, killing 1 person and injuring 5 others. The governor, Oleg Kiper, accused Russia of again trying to disrupt grain exports from Ukraine. The attack is the second in as many days on cargo vessels in Odessa. Police in Guatemala have raided 5 regional offices of the British aid agency Save the Children as part of an investigation into child abuse. Local media recently reported that prosecutors had requested information from the authorities in Texas about the alleged involvement of the organisation in smuggling children and teenagers across the US border. In a statement released last month, Save the Children emphatically denied any involvement. Cissy Houston, the American gospel singer and mother of Whitney Houston, has died at the age of 91. She'd been suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Charles Aniagolu looks back at her career.
This is the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Nick. So we start the programme in Israel, where millions of people spent Monday reflecting on the first anniversary of the Hamas attacks in southern Israel. Some 1,200 people were killed, precipitating the huge Israeli military response against Hamas in Gaza. In memory of October the 7th, Israeli gathered across the country, including in Tel Aviv, where family members of some of the people still being held hostage by Hamas called on their government to do more to bring them home. Meanwhile, in a combative pre-recorded speech, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected multiple calls for a ceasefire and said Israel We have outlined the goals of this war and we are achieving them. Toppling the rule of Hamas, bringing all the hostages home, both the living and the deceased alike. This is a sacred mission, and we will not stop until we complete it, eliminating any future threat from Hamas to Israel. Well, nearly 42,000 people have been killed in Gaza during a year of Israeli bombardments. We'll hear more about that in a moment, but let's first turn to where the broader conflict seems most intense at the moment, either side of Israel's border with Lebanon. Throughout Monday, Israel continued to fire missiles at Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah fired more than 100 rockets into Israel, most of which were intercepted. Our correspondent Lucy Williamson has been meeting people in northern Israel affected by the ongoing Hezbollah attacks.
Just before 9 o'clock this morning, Dr. Osama Nasser left his car in Ma'alot's hospital car park. 5 minutes later, a Hezbollah rocket hit as patients lay in the building meters away. His car twisted and crumpled and shot through with shrapnel.
I think that I'm a lucky man. Let's say that the car not me.
And you have a 2-year-old daughter. I can see the child's seat in the back of
Yes.
the car here.
I have a little daughter, 2 years old. When she hears the booms and the siren, she got nervous.
Suddenly, more sirens. I just run into the safe room here after hearing the sirens, and there's a constant barrage of interceptions above us. More than 30 rockets fired towards Ma'alot. Outside, fresh smoke nearby marked where one had landed. Another hit a house further up. Part of the rocket still unexploded after landing. An elderly neighbor wheeled out, frozen in shock, barely registering her injury. Israel's army said Hezbollah fired more than 130 rockets across the border today. Israel's ground invasion of Lebanon is triggering a response. But a year after the Hamas attacks, many here see war as the solution to this border conflict, and invasion as the best defense.
Well, Israel's invasion of Lebanon has had devastating consequences for much of the civilian population there. Thousands of airstrikes and hand-to-hand fighting between Israeli ground troops and Hezbollah units have forced more than 1 million people across the country from their homes. More than 400,000 people are reported to have crossed into Syria to escape. Our correspondent Hugo Bashega reports now from Lebanon's capital, Beirut.
Night in Beirut and more Israeli airstrikes. In one location, they triggered multiple secondary explosions, like fireworks, an indication of weapons and ammunition storage sites being hit. Israel bombed during the day too. The south came under intense airstrikes. At least 10 firefighters were